Hello and welcome back. Eddie Rodosovich, George Stoya here from the Soonerscoop.com studios. A little bit of a weird week, George. As we talked about it on the Tuesday, it is a fun week because we don't have a football game to cover on Saturday. Might have to let loose in the BLC. Fun show ahead. We talked to Andy Staples with On3, one of our brethren from the On3 network. And, I thought that it was a really good time to catch up with him. We did talk to Andy, George, way back when, in July, when there was a lot of questions about this team, right?
And he's the man to go to. He is, in my opinion, one of the best, if not the best, voices in college football. And so we got to speak to him back in Nashville, a little bit about the expectations for Oklahoma this year, and he kind of nailed it.
Yeah, he did. And if you weren't with us way back when we were in Nashville for SEC Media Day, here's a little bit of a snippet from George's interview with Andy Staples.
What are the expectations for Oklahoma this year?
I expect them to be one of the best teams in the Big 12, and this is an interesting one because this is the first time in a while, and I know everybody looks at the recruiting rankings and says, well, Texas recruits just as well as – no, Oklahoma has developed NFL players better than Texas for the last 10 years. It's obvious. You can tell by the draft. This might be the first time in a long time that Texas really has had more NFL talent than Oklahoma has. So they are going to be kind of the underdog in that deal. And then you've got the situation where all of the teams that are staying in the Big 12 and the 4 new teams that are coming into the Big 12 are going to want to send Oklahoma out with a loss.
So that was George's interview with Andy Staples. And, as we fast forward things, Oklahoma does head into the bye week 6-0, coming off the big win at the Cotton Bowl over the weekend, 34-30. We've recapped that with Josh McQuistion back on Monday right here on Soonerscoop.com YouTube channel. We talked about it on Tuesday, yet again, on the Soonerscoop.com YouTube channel here with the practice report and talking to players and coaches and getting to hear from Deshaun McCullough and getting to hear from a number of guys that had their first taste of the OU-Texas rivalry. And then on Wednesday as well on the Unofficial 40, which you can catch on any of the podcasting platforms. Had Bob Prisbillo as well being able to chime in. And not to mention, we talked about it Saturday night on the Instant Reaction right here on Soonerscoop.com YouTube channel, as well as the Eskridge Lexus postgame podcast. So without further ado, here is our conversation with On3's Andy Staples. Andy, thanks for joining us today. We thought this would be a perfect time. We talked to you at the middle of July over at SEC Media Days, as they just saw. And, it's been, I think everything that has happened with Oklahoma here through the first 6 games has been a little bit of a dream. It's probably been better than expected from the outside looking in. How real is this Oklahoma thing right now?
Well, it's very real. I mean, they're going to be favored in every game between now and the Big 12 championship. And if they get to the Big 12 championship, they're probably going to be favored against Texas because it's probably going to be Texas again. And, I think what we saw on Saturday was probably the best version of, because, we talked in the summer and we said, okay, what does this look like if Oklahoma is much better? And it is the defense looks competent, that they understand the scheme, that their personnel has improved through the transfer portal, which clearly it has. And then, I think the offensive line is another huge bright spot. I think that's what they played really well. And I mean, my guy at left tackle blocking 2 guys on the touchdown play. Come on. I mean, Walter Rouse is a Stanford transfer. He got a Stanford degree. Now he's getting a master's in football at Oklahoma. I mean, come on. That's exactly what you hope for. And I think Dylan Gabriel getting to show what he can do, which I really think last year he didn't get a chance to because you saw what was behind him in the Texas game. And so they had to be really careful. Now, I'm sure they feel very comfortable with Jackson Arnold. So it makes them more comfortable to let Dylan do what he can do. And you see him become one of the more dynamic quarterbacks in the country.
Andy, you obviously watch almost every college football game, if not every college football game. And coming into the game on Saturday, I think a lot of people across the country would say Texas's win over Alabama was the best win in the country this season. Maybe Ohio State over Notre Dame and South Bend. Where is Oklahoma's win over Texas in terms of national landscape, and is it the best win in college football so far this year?
It's the best win right now. Ohio State, Penn State's coming up, so there's a chance that maybe gets surpassed at that point. But Michigan, Penn State down the road. But right now, Oklahoma over Texas is the best win in college football, and Oklahoma's going to be able to ride that for quite some time. I mean, they're going to be in striking distance. All they have to do is keep winning. And like I said, they're going to be favored in every game between now and the end of the season. So all they have to do is keep doing what they've been doing, and they're going to be in great shape and be in basically a one-game scenario for the college football playoff. And if we remember correctly, last year, the team that went 12-0 and then went into the Big 12 championship game and lost still made the college football playoff. So it's possible with other stuff happening that they're in the best shape of anybody right now.
Dillon Gabriel's play on Saturday, there were so many boxes that had to be checked, and I think that there was a question mark as far as what Dillon Gabriel was going to be able to do against a good defense. From the outside looking in, again, it would seem that he's very much more comfortable. We could tell you that he's very much more comfortable in running Jeff Lebby's offense. Now without Andrell Anthony, how big of a concern is that for you, just in terms of what he was able to do, deep threat, as well as, and something we've talked about quite a bit, Andrell Anthony had kind of become a safety blanket on third down for Oklahoma and Dillon Gabriel. How impressed have you been with that wide receiver unit under Emmett Jones in his first year?
Oh, I think they've been good, and the Anthony thing is a concern going forward, just because, like you said, the relationship between Gabriel and Anthony had developed to the point where it looked like Anthony was the guy he was most comfortable throwing to. But that doesn't mean somebody else can't develop into that role as the season goes on. The thing about these next few games is they're going to have some opportunities for experimentation. They're going to be ahead in a lot of these games,
sure, and
so they're going to be able to figure out who maybe fills in that role. And obviously, Jalil Farouk's been great. Nick Anderson made the unbelievable play at the end of the game. Drake Stoops set them up for that touchdown. We're going down the list, but that's pretty far down the list already. Sure. A lot of teams would be very grateful to have three guys like Jalil Farouk, Nick Anderson, and Drake Stoops. And then Oklahoma's got some other folks like Austin Stogner, you at tight end, and then some younger folks that maybe will come up and develop as the season goes on. I think they're going to be okay. Losing Anthony does hurt, but they've really spread the ball around really well. I think the line is playing well. And that's the one thing. Watching the Texas game at first, I was like, okay, is it that they are neutralizing Texas's defensive line with their tempo, or are they doing it with a combination of tempo and good line play? And I think it's the second one. I think the offensive line was playing really well, and then the tempo made it even harder for those Texas defensive linemen to really do anything.
Andy, you mentioned Dillon Gabriel earlier. Here at the Scoop offices, we've been talking a lot. Is he in the Heisman race? With that type of a performance, we still think, he's got a ways to go in terms of winning the award, but where is he right now in the Heisman race? I mean, who are maybe some of those guys that you're looking at? Maybe other than, we all know Caleb Williams is at the top, but who else is maybe in that race?
Well, Gabriel's definitely in it, but there's a lot of other people in it too. I mean, Michael Penix Jr. is having a great season at Washington. I don't even look at this, like Oregon-Washington this week, I don't even look at it as an elimination game in the Heisman race. Bo Nix and Michael Penix are both putting up massive numbers this season. They both look great. And then you've got Caleb Williams, obviously. Jaden Daniels at LSU. A lot of it is sort of the Caleb Williams situation. Like, Caleb Williams has to put up massive numbers because his defense is going to give up lots of points. Well, Jaden Daniels' defense might be worse than Caleb Williams' defense. And they're playing better teams right now. USC is going to play better teams here in the next few weeks, but LSU's had to play some really good offenses in the last few weeks. And so that has forced Jaden Daniels to keep pace with those offenses. And they didn't do it against Ole Miss, but he put up great numbers. They did do it against Missouri, and he put up obscene numbers. So if he keeps doing that, it's going to be hard to top him or Caleb Williams, just because they are being forced to accumulate incredible stats to win these games. And a lot of people, let's be real, don't actually watch the games. They just go look at the numbers. But I will say, even if you are actually watching the games, you're very impressed with what those guys are doing, because they just have to do more. So Dillon Gabriel probably doesn't have to do as much as those guys. And so that may be a problem for him going forward if you're trying to compete with them for the Heisman. And I don't see Brent Venables as the kind of guy who's like, okay, we're just going to let our QB compile some stats this week.
Very, very familiar with covering that style of team. I think that getting to know Lincoln Riley over the last couple of years, pretty used to it. What we're not used to is an Oklahoma defense, and it's led by Danny Stutzman. He kind of had his breakout party, if you will, over the course of these first 6 games, specifically over the weekend. He's selling all the T-shirts right now with Opolis. How impressive has this turnaround been defensively for Oklahoma and Brent Venables? I think that was something that when they hired him from day one, you knew they were going to play defense. It was so bad a year ago. I think that he lost some people off the train. Those people, of course, have jumped back on. How impressive has this thing been for what Brent has been able to do with going through the transfer portal, getting a number of guys? Jacob Lacey makes a big play on Saturday at the Cotton Bowl in the sack that kind of made Texas go a little bit more conservative on that final drive, or the second to final drive. Just in terms of what Oklahoma is defensively, you look at the numbers, it's really, really good. Not necessarily how sustainable is this, just how impressive has this been? Has this turnaround been on the defensive side of the ball for Oklahoma?
It's been very impressive because there were times they looked lost last year. And I think part of it's personnel, part of it was scheme, but a lot of it was everybody just kind of learning the scheme. They clearly had that down now. You don't see the coverage bust you saw last year. You definitely see guys in the right places. But a lot of it also is just getting a talent upgrade through the transfer portal. George and I talked about this on my show last week a lot. They're different.
Yeah.
Think about what we're talking about. We're talking about DeJohn Terry, Rondell Bothroyd, Reggie Pearson, Dasan McCullough. Trace Ford's played in a ton of games, understands, the stakes at play here. That's a lot of experience plus talent that they didn't have last year. And so they have upgraded the talent, and now they know what they're doing. You combine those two things, that makes it a very tough defense to deal with.
Andy, last OU question for me, and I'm going to put you on the spot here, but 6 games left. I know there's a lot of talk already about OU and Texas playing again in the Big 12 championship. What is your prediction for Oklahoma the rest of the way? Do you think they're going to make the Big 12 championship? Do you think they can win? Do you think they can make the playoff? I think I saw you put out your prediction for OU Penn State, maybe in the Rose Bowl, which I know Eddie and I would be all for.
Amazing. That'd be amazing.
Exactly.
We'd be for that. But I guess, what is your prediction for OU the rest of the way?
I think Oklahoma is going to be 12-0 and Texas is going to be 11-1, and they're going to play in the Big 12 championship game. And all the Texas players will be wearing those Danny Stutzman shirts under their jerseys, so that if they win, they will rip their shoulder pads off and be like, ha ha. But that's further motivation for Oklahoma to hold serve in that game. But I think that's what's going to happen. They're going to play again, and really what happens after that depends on what happens everywhere else.
Sure.
I mean, Oklahoma's in the position where it can just win and they're in. I actually think Texas is in the position, as long as they don't drop another game, where they just win and they're in that game. What it really means is, does other stuff happen that would allow Oklahoma to lose a tight Big 12 championship game and still make the playoff in that scenario? But that's a lot of, like, Brent Venables' head would explode talking about that right now, because they got 6 more games that they have to win before that.
It was something that we had talked about on the Unofficial 40 podcast this week, and it's a little bit strange because it seems like Oklahoma and Texas are so far ahead of everybody else in the Big 12. Maybe Big 12 office's nightmare, just in terms of how much hype they're going to get over these next 6 weeks with the finish of the regular season. Who is the 3rd best team in the Big 12 right now?
Ooh,
it's crazy. Like, Tech's been disappointing. K-State's been disappointing.
Yeah, K-State going to Oklahoma State and losing the way they did. And it's weird because they weren't as far off. Like, you look at the success rate chart and all that, they were pretty close, but the game was not close. You know who actually is playing somewhat well now is Iowa State.
Yeah.
They seem to be, they look a little bit better, but I don't trust that. None of the new additions has been really good. Let me throw one at you. West Virginia.
It's crazy, but I mean, it's not crazy at the same time.
Yeah, as we record this, they're going to play at Houston tonight, Thursday night. So perhaps Houston, in its best chance to get its first Big 12 win for a little while, plays better. But Neil Brown's God, West Virginia playing really well. And I thought, their win at TCU, the defense was pretty impressive. Neil Brown comes out and says afterward, we haven't even played our best football yet. They were off last week. Like, they know they're in the national spotlight. Their only loss is to Penn State.
Sure.
And Penn State's one of the best teams in the country. So I might go with West Virginia right now.
That would be awesome. What if we got a West Virginia Big 12 championship run? That would be
amazing.
Out of nowhere.
Especially considering, like, when we talked to him at Big 12 Media Day, I mean, people were basically asking, like, when are you going to get fired this year? That was basically the main, I think, thought around West Virginia football.
I love Neil Brown. He let me in bed with his Troy team the week they played Nebraska in 2018 because I had texted his SID in the spring of that year and said, you're going to beat Nebraska. Let me in bed with you that week. And so I got to know Neil and his staff, and they're really fun people and very good football coaches. So I'm happy for them that they've been able to have this season because they're really sticking in the eye of everybody. And I talked to Neil in May, and his whole thing was, look, I get where I am. I understand the situation. I know I make a lot of money and they have very high expectations, but I'm going down swinging if I'm going down. And it's just been so much fun to watch. And interesting that you guys say that. Probably the only way they make it to the Big 12 championship game, though, might have to beat Oklahoma to do it. And I just don't think they're going to do that.
Yeah. Andy, while we have you, I want to ask you about the situation down in Los Angeles, because I know our viewers will want to hear about the Lincoln Riley situation.
There's not too many people that are upset about the situation at hand with Alex Grinch.
And look, they're winning football games, but what is your takeaway from just – and we've seen it here in Norman. We saw it for years with the defense and all that, but what is your takeaway from what is happening with USC and just the defense and kind of the catastrophe it seems to be every single week over there?
Well, if we go back, and I realize I was working for a different company at this time, so maybe we don't pull all the clips of the stories, but if we go back to when all this happened and Lincoln Riley leaves and they hire Brent Venables, I believe I was one of the people saying that Brent Venables will actually get you players who will help you compete in the SEC, and Lincoln Riley's history suggests he won't. And that sure looks like what's happening.
Right.
And Lincoln Riley is putting the same team on the field every single time. Here's the thing, and I don't know this. I would assume that USC did give Lincoln Riley some heads up, input, everything into the Big Ten move. Because remember, he'd been there 7 months at the time they decided to move to the Big Ten. That process had been underway. It probably was underway when they hired him. So he's probably aware of all that's going on. But I do wonder how much he thought, because I still believe he wanted to leave Oklahoma so he did not have to recruit in the SEC, because he didn't like that, didn't want to deal with that. I do wonder how he feels if you gave him a truth serum about now going into a Big Ten that is probably every bit as competitive as the SEC when you add who they're adding.
Sure.
Like that's if you want to win, because you don't have to win. You got to come on top 3, maybe top 4 in the SEC or the Big Ten to make the 12-team playoff. If you want to come in top 3 in the Big Ten, it's just as hard as being top 3 in the SEC now. And so I don't think he got the out he wanted. Like USC in the Pac-12 with the teams he was putting on the field at Oklahoma and what we've seen so far at USC, you can win that probably most years. Maybe not this year because of Oregon and Washington, but a lot of years you can win that. They're not going to win the Big Ten like this. They're going to have to change. He is going to have to philosophically change and decide, we want to play defense differently. We want to hit more at practice. We want tackling to matter. Like that will have to be figured out, or they will never get what they want. And the thing was, you knew that was going to be the case in the SEC.
Yeah.
And so now, look at this. Oklahoma's getting top 100 D-line recruits. Now, granted, he's from the state, but still, like, that happened. You have to have those to play in the SEC. Oklahoma's winning the line of scrimmage against a Texas team that rotates 3 NFL guys at defensive tackle. 3 NFL guys of the 4 and maybe 4. Like, that's not what Oklahoma was doing before. It's not actually what Texas wasn't putting that on the field before, but they are now. So I actually think Oklahoma and Texas are both in good positions as they move into the SEC. But Brent Venables, even though he never coached in the SEC, this was always my point, is he always had to recruit with the idea that they're going to see Alabama or Georgia or Ohio State at the end of the year when he was at Clemson. And it allowed him to understand what you're looking for. I don't think Lincoln Riley ever understood what you're looking for on that side of the ball.
You know, it's interesting, too, and just from a national perspective, last one from me, it seems like for so long it's been Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State. You take those 3 and it's just find somebody else to throw in there into the playoff. That's going to be, you know, the 4 teams that compete for the national championship. Has that gap closed because of the quarterback issues? And it seems like Carson Beck's starting to play a little bit better for Georgia, the 600 yards, 33 first downs a week ago against Kentucky. Is this the year? Is this still the year at the midpoint that maybe somebody does jump up and all of a sudden we're looking up in that second weekend of January and it's somebody other than one of the 2 top dogs in the SEC or in Ohio State?
I still think Georgia's gap is bigger. Yeah. The gap between Georgia and everybody else is bigger, and Carson Beck is really good. Like, they're just now figuring out how to use him. He's probably, you know, a bigger skill set than Stetson Bennett, but they tried to use it in the way they use Stetson Bennett. That's not really the best way. The best way to use Carson Beck is just kind of chucking the ball. And you saw that against Kentucky, and it was lights out in the first quarter. And Kentucky's good. Yeah. And so I think Georgia's still a little different than everybody else. Ohio State and Alabama, there are a lot of teams, not a lot, but there are multiple teams that can definitely compete with them. You know, we saw Texas beat Alabama. Texas, Oklahoma against Ohio State and Alabama, that's a great round robin. Like, they all kind of probably beat each other. One team that I'm very curious to see against better competition, because I think they've now ascended to a new level, is Michigan. Because Michigan is loaded defensively. And it's not like we always do the stars matter thing with what you bring in, but it's what you bring in plus what you put out. Michigan's going to put out maybe 15, 16 draft picks this year. Their secondary was so good that guys that started last year had to transfer because they could not get on the field. The offensive line, they bring in 2 transfers. Those guys are going to be NFL players. Like, they've got an Arizona State transfer at left tackle and a Stanford transfer at center, where they're still going to be one of the best offensive lines in the country. They may win the Joe Moore Award again. Like, it's crazy. And then on top of that, J.J. McCarthy's the best quarterback they've had in the Harbaugh era, and he just gets better because they keep kind of finding new things to do with him. You know, last year they were going to run for 300 or 400 yards a game. Didn't matter. So until they got to Ohio State, they never really had to unlock J.J. McCarthy. Teams are loading the box so much against them now that JJ gets to do a little more every game, and he's really dynamic. Now, they don't necessarily have, like, their receivers aren't as good as Ohio State's. So they're not going to completely blow you off the field in the passing game. God have mercy on everyone's soul if they do get receivers like that. Although I think JJ's probably going to the NFL after this year. So that's the one I'd say I'd really like to see them play Georgia. I really would, because similar styles, and you saw them play in that Orange Bowl after the 2021 season. This would be a great example of how far Michigan has come. I don't know what the result would be, but I bet it would be a much more competitive game.
Lastly, Andy, last one for me. Big, fun weekend of college football. I think OU fans are going to enjoy the bye week.
Nice slate.
Yeah, I just want to know, what games are you watching that maybe are off the radar, under the radar, and then who you got in the Oregon-Washington game?
So I'm going Oregon because I've had Oregon as the Pac-12 champ since the preseason. I love what they did through the transfer portal on defense. They really needed to upgrade the talent on that side of the ball, and they did. I mean, if you watch the Oregon State game last year, it was embarrassing. They ran 17 times in a row in the middle of a comeback. But I also think, and Oklahoma fans can probably identify with this, a second-year head coach understands so much more than a first-year head coach does. You just don't know what you don't know. And like last year when Oregon played Washington, it was a really tight game. Bo Nix gets hurt on a key third down. They have to figure out what to do. They wind up kicking a field goal. Dan Lanning was in his, I believe, 7th or 8th game as a head coach at that point. Kalen DeBoer had been a head coach at Fresno State. He'd won 3 NAIA national titles earlier in his career at University of Sioux Falls. So it was a very different experience level for Kalen DeBoer than for Dan Lanning. Dan Lanning now has had a chance to figure out, okay, here's what I didn't like about being a head coach, or what I didn't understand, and now I understand it. And I think you've seen that with Brent Venables too. So I think that's what gives Oregon a little bit more of an edge, is they had better players probably last year, but they just didn't have that experience on the coaching side. They've made some tweaks. They've added some guys. Chris Hampton was Tulane's defensive play caller last year. He's there helping Tosh Lapoy call plays now on the defense. I think that makes a big difference. So that's why I think, even though Washington's great, Michael Penix throws the prettiest deep ball in America. And, I know you guys get to watch a pretty lefty deep ball too, but I think Penix might be even prettier. But they've got those great receivers. I think Oregon can hold them in check. Now, other games, obviously I want to see Notre Dame USC.
Sure.
Because I want to see, what does Notre Dame's offense look like against that defense? Because I suspect Ohio State, Duke, Louisville, Notre Dame played 3 pretty damn good defenses.
Yeah.
They're about to play not a good defense. Now, Caleb Williams and company will score more than all those other teams did on Notre Dame, but I think Notre Dame will be able to score a little bit too. So excited about that one. There's some really interesting games in the SEC. For example, can LSU's defense make Auburn's passing offense look functional? Because that would be quite a feat.
Yeah.
And if it is, that's going to be a really good game. Another one is Missouri-Kentucky, because Missouri has been very good. They should not have lost to LSU, but they could not stop Jaden Daniels. Now Kentucky's coming off that horrific loss to Georgia, but Kentucky can still have a very good season. They're still probably as good or better than everybody else on their schedule. And so what do they do to come back, especially after Mark Stoops basically said, hey, we got to buy better players so we can be like Georgia?
It is going to be a really good weekend. And for the Oklahoma fan, it's going to be a really fun weekend to be able to sit around and probably watch the OU Texas game yet again. I think Watch ESPN is going to set a record for games replayed over the next week. He is Andy Staples from On3. We appreciate it, man. Always good to catch up with you. Hopefully we can get you back in Norman sometime at some point. So we appreciate it, man.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Andy.
See ya. Thanks again to Andy Staples for joining us. It was just good to catch up with him. As you said, George, he is one of the best in college football. I mean, he does those Saturday night recaps of games. And I know this past weekend, they didn't get done with the USC-Arizona game until, I think, 2:30 out on the East Coast, and they're sitting up talking with about college football. It's quite unbelievable. You can also catch him on 3 YouTube channel as well, a nightly show during the weekday. So he's one of the great I think resources that we have it on 3, and just nationally, he's excellent.
Yeah, I've been on a show the last couple weeks.
That's a little bit of a humble brag, folks.
Yeah, no big deal.
And you did well.
I did great. I learned from the best, Eddie.
Thank you.
But he is great, and you love his perspective because he does watch every single game.
Absolutely.
And as you heard, he's breaking down teams, left and right for us. So he's awesome and just a good person to follow if you love college football.
It's going to be a great college weekend, college football weekend. I think especially just because Oklahoma fans are kind of you're still on that victory lap, right?
Yeah.
You're still being able to watch the OU Texas replays. I think that as I said to Andy, I think that Watch ESPN is going to probably set a record of a game replayed within the last 7 days with the OU Texas ending and everything that came into it. But the matter at hand, Oklahoma is on a bye week. They do have 6 games left on the schedule, and of course they will get back underway come next Saturday when Central Florida comes to town, George. And let's hear from Brent Venables. He kind of sets the stage for what we're going to talk about with these final 6 games. Here is Brent Venables on Monday.
So we're in a much better place. Obviously, I think we're bowl eligible. Somebody wanted me to bring that up to the team. I actually didn't bring it up to the team because I'm proud of that they have taken care of business, but this is Oklahoma, and I don't want to, we're not entitled to win, and we're not entitled to be 6-0 every year. But that's the least of our concerns right now. But that's our second goal, is to win that game. And so we've gotten 2 of our several goals. And again, I want a hungry, committed football team. I love the humility that we had today. We've got great self-awareness. Mismanaged success is a very normal thing when you're in these positions. And so keeping 2 hands on the wheel, white knuckle, grip with both hands is something that we're really focused on, and counting on the leaders in this team to stay hungry, driven, humble, willing to show up every day and work their butts off and try to get better, because we got a lot that we can get better at. And that's what it's going to take to have the kind of finish that we want to this season. I think the back half of our schedule from top to bottom is much more challenging than what the front part of our schedule was. And we should have an expectation of improving and getting better, and you do that by just having a great Monday. And I thought our guys had the right mindset, the right humility, and the right focus, to them to be able to do that.
If you thought Oklahoma was going to get off easy during a bye week, just in terms of what practice has been, I don't know what you've heard, George, but I heard from a mental aspect of just constant grinding, constant coaching throughout this past week. I've heard it's been one of the toughest weeks Oklahoma's had on the practice field. Now, it's been light. They had the Tuesday community service day, but just in terms of, I think, what Brent Venables and this staff is asking of them, it's going to be a grind because, as he said, the back half of the schedule is a lot tougher than what you had in the front part.
And you look at it, and I know everybody looks at the percentages out there, right? The FPI that says, Oklahoma has a 90% chance to win all of these games, or whatever the percentages are that are thrown out there. And they're going to be favored in every single game. But you look at it, Eddie, trips to Lawrence, trips to Stillwater. I mean, that's going to be a crazy atmosphere. You got to go to Provo, which I'm guessing is going to be a night game. Then you're on a short week. You got to play TCU on a Friday after Thanksgiving. Going to be a difficult week. West Virginia all of a sudden looks like a pretty good football team, or at least above average, which is not what we expected. So this back half is going to be tougher than some anticipate. I fully expect Oklahoma to win most of these games, right? Maybe you slip up here or there in one game, but it's definitely going to be difficult. And I think you hit it. You could see it at practice on Monday when we were standing out there yelling at the players. You could tell it was kind of an intense practice. And so they're back to, hey, nice win, awesome win. It was one of their goals was to beat Texas, but their focus now is, hey, we got a lot still in front of us that we want to accomplish.
Just to reset a little bit, you have Central Florida when you return on the October 21st. It's kind of nice how it breaks up with 3 and 3. You got 3 home games, 3 away games. Central Florida back in Norman, 11 a.m. ABC coming up on October 21st. Then they make the trip to Lawrence October 28th. Who knows what's going to be the situation with Jalen Daniels, which is increasingly becoming more weird by the minute. We hit that on the unofficial 40. Then the big trip to Stillwater for Bedlam on November 4th, the final Bedlam that will maybe ever be. So I think that that atmosphere is going to be interesting. And then West Virginia, a trip to Provo, and as you said, a home game against TCU the Friday after Thanksgiving at 11 a.m. Let's go 1-1. Toughest road game.
Right now, I still think it's Lawrence, just because I just have a gut feeling Jalen Daniels is going to come back for that game.
All of a sudden, a return of the Phoenix. The rise of the Phoenix.
It's close between that and BYU, because I think
Sure.
BYU is just a good, tough football team, and I'm just not a believer in Oklahoma State yet. So
Don't discount the Pokes, man. I'm not saying that it's going to be a game in which you're on upset alert or anything like that, but
I think you are.
There's going to be some emotion within that game.
100%. I just am not a believer yet, and I
Sure.
think that, again, if Jalen Daniels plays for Kansas, that's going to be a really tough game. And then home game, I'll go with TCU. I'm not a believer in West Virginia. I think that they're definitely better than what we anticipated, but I'm not sitting here saying, hey, they're going to compete for a Big 12 championship. I don't think UCF is very good. I think TCU is just one of those teams that they're going to be well coached.
Yeah.
They've got good athletes. And you talk about a short week, 11 a.m., Friday after Thanksgiving. It's just a tough matchup, especially in what I'm going to guess is a night game in Provo. You're traveling all the way back for a short week. that just feels like a really tough game.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. As we said, the bye week probably happened it's not even probably. It did happen at the right time for Oklahoma. A bunch of guys can get healthy here over the course of the next week and a half before Central Florida arrives in town. We've talked about the Andrell Anthony injury. They're going to need to find some guys to step up in that wide receiver room. The good news is the depth that thing has, right?
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, we've talked about it all week. Nick Anderson is the number one guy that you think of. Jaden Gibson, I think we're going to see a lot of. Brennan Thompson, Jaquez Petaway. They've got dudes there. So, and I think also you still feel really good about Jalil Farouk and Drake Stoops.
Yeah, Jalil Farouk is coming off of his best game, maybe in a Sooner uniform this past weekend at the Cotton Bowl. That's been well documented. As for us, we're going to head on into the weekend. Everybody have a safe bye week. I know that's going to be a little bit weird, but you're going to have an opportunity to watch a ton of college football, as Andy Staples outlined during the interview. From the Soonerscoop.com studios, make sure you are subscribed to the Soonerscoop.com YouTube page. He's George Stoya. I'm Eddie Radosevich. We'll talk to you later.